Good morning. This is Faith at Faith and Books, and this is the Sunday morning edition of May is for Magazine. And I'm continuing my exploration of this magazine, Integrity. This is from April 1954, and this was an underground Catholic magazine, kind of a progressive pre-Vatican II. So it's really, really interesting to read. And this one, the one I picked for this morning, is about minority groups. I thought it would be really interesting to look back before I was born, so this was 6 years before I was born, and see what the state of affairs was and how we've remembered things. And the three minority groups that they talk about in this particular issue are are Jews, anti-Semitism, integration with African Americans, though this is 1954, so they're saying Negro and colored, and they have a couple of articles on that issue, and then finally one on Puerto Ricans. And to me, Puerto Ricans I live in an area where it just never was an issue. I thought they made it up for West Side Story. I had no idea. And this magazine is based in New York. So I think it's just about the time when there had been a lot of immigration from, can you call it immigration? But a lot of Puerto Ricans moving to New York City, and I think they said something like at the time, they were 8.9% of the city population. So it was a huge influx. And of course that whenever you have a new group moving into an area, you get trouble with integration and people adjusting and such. But I feel so ignorant about the whole history of Puerto Rico. That's come up in my McClure's reading, because last week I was focusing on the 1898 edition, and that was when the Spanish-American War was, and I didn't even know that that's when the U.S. acquired, or whatever, won Puerto Rico. So I have to talk to Alba, who I am reading John Adams with, about to get some resources for reading about the history of Puerto Rico, because where I grew up is a complete non-issue. It just never came up. But anyway, the article that really kind of interested me the most was the one on anti-Semitism, called The Problem of Anti-Semitic Humor. And that's because, I'm married to a Jewish guy, and my kids are all half Jewish, and they all look very Jewish. And I myself have I'm forgetting right now, was it 3 greats or 4 greats, but my great-great-great-great-grandfather was Samuel Gompers, who started the AFL, the American Federation of Labor, and he was a Jewish immigrant who came from England to New York, and was a cigar roller, was in the cigar rollers union, whatever you call that, and cigar makers. Sorry, I have a tickle in my throat. And so anyways, I'm a little bit Jewish myself. So I'm always interested in that, and also the Catholic Church's relationship with Jews and Judaism is a topic that's really interesting to me too, because we celebrate both here, and there is one thing I love about Catholicism is that it's preserved in spite of the thousands of years of or is it thousands? Yeah, thousands of years of anti-Semitism in its ranks. It's also maintained real connection to the Old Testament and to a Jewish way of doing things. The whole emphasis on oral tradition, the reenactment of the Last Supper, which is the Passover for Mass. There's just so much that's that's really still tied to Judaism. The whole idea of purgatory, that's something that we share with Jews. So this article was the most interesting to me, and what was nice about it is that he goes through and he cites positive things that popes have said. He starts with 1915 with Pope Benedict XV, who spoke out. And it's maybe it sounded better in Latin. It's a little bit kind of watered down or too wordy. And then Pope Pius XI went out of his way to condemn antipathy for the once chosen people of God. That language kind of stopped me because, I don't think God makes mistakes. So once chosen, always chosen. But let's see, what did he say here? He says, this is a quote from March 25th, 1928, Pope Pius XI, moved by this same charity, the Apostolic See has protected this very people from unjust persecutions. Maybe he's trying to do that right then. And just as it reprobates all hatreds and contentions between peoples, so especially does it condemn hatred against this people, once chosen by God, namely that hatred which is now customarily signified by the name anti-Semitism. So after World War II, the church kind of changed its approach to Jews, evangelizing Jews, and our whole religion. It clarified our relationship, which is sort of an ongoing thing, but it really came out with in Vatican II, which is one reason why I really appreciate Vatican II. And then there's Pope Pius, let's see, this one's good. Pope Pius XI's a dramatic pronouncement against anti-Semitism in 1938, so this is when Hitler had come to power. During an audience with a group of Belgian radio officials, the question of the persecution of Jews came up. Calling for the Roman Missal, the Holy Father read with tears in his eyes the passage in the canon after the consecration where God is asked to accept the Mass as he accepted, quote, the sacrifice of our patriarch Abraham. Pius XI then added, Abraham is called our patriarch and ancestor. Anti-Semitism is not compatible with the sublime reality of this text. It is a movement in which we Catholics cannot participate, nor is it possible for Christians to take part in anti-Semitism. We are all Semites spiritually. That was September 1938. Anyway, he goes on to talk about how basically what starts the whole article is people telling off-color jokes and him saying that it's just not a good way to get a laugh because it brings up all this evil, this hatred, and this whole injustice, and so we should avoid even that, right? When I was growing up, the big jokes were Polish jokes. I don't know. I mean, I was born in 1960. By the time I was around, I wasn't so much Jewish, but I lived in kind of an integrated neighborhood, and I went to a Catholic school, but it was integrated. It wasn't, where I was, I think because I'm in the metropolitan area of Washington, D.C., and it's so transient, and there's so many different groups coming in and out, I think it's just not the same level. It's still there, but it's not at the same level that maybe other areas in the country experience. Anyway, one thing that really interested me about this article was the author. It's Albert S. Foley, S.J., and I looked him up. And while this article is about anti-Semitism, he was really involved in the civil rights movement, and he worked with Martin Luther King. In fact, the college where this guy taught, which was I think called Spring Hill College, was a Jesuit college in Georgia, and Martin Luther King references the Jesuits at that college in his famous letter from Birmingham jail. And it's really this guy. This guy was the ringleader, Albert S. Foley, S.J. So that was kind of neat to learn about him. Pretty cool. So anyway, that was the first article. Then it gets into integration. And, you know, the language is so dated and the attitude is, I mean, they were trying, bless their hearts, but it's just, looking back, it's the racism that's underlying even people who are trying to overcome racism is apparent, just in the language. But this article here is an interview with a parish priest or pastor in Detroit, and he was doing things to integrate his parish. And so he's sort of top down. He decided we need to integrate enough of this, and you know what he did, even though he met opposition from people, how he worked to overcome that and really evangelize them in what the real way we're supposed to treat each other. So that was interesting. Got a very long poem here. This is April, so it's probably Easter, for Good Friday. Then they interview a Catholic laywoman who's in the South trying to integrate from her perspective. So she's not in a position of authority, really. So she talks about how you do it by just talking to others in your community, maybe getting some sort of pastoral rank or, you know, position. Like she says, you know, maybe there's a group in your parish and you can join it, and then you can see how you can integrate that group. So she's sort of doing it. The first one is the pastor kind of integrating from the top down, and then this is from a lay person who's trying to go from the ground up. So that was interesting. And she talks about she's annoyed with Northerners who come down and sort of tell them what to do, but don't really understand the dynamics of the situation. So, you know, they're helping, but then they're not helping. So I didn't read this article. There's a lot of references to friendship houses, which were the Catholic worker houses, because Dorothy Day was sort of pioneered integration. And the first, another interesting thing about that Father Foley, and I'm going to look for this book, is he wrote a book called Bishop Healy, Beloved Outcast. So listen to this. It is the story of a priest born in Georgia, which is where I think Father Foley was, of a slave mother and an Irish father who became Bishop of Portland, Maine in 1875 and was known as colored by the Catholics of New England. So that would be really interesting to read. Right now, the big African-American Catholic figure is Father Augustine or Augustine. I'm going to mispronounce his name, Tolton. Am I saying that right, or is it Tolton? Tolton? Oh my gosh, I should know this. But anyway, he was an African-American, I think he was born a slave, and then they moved to the Midwest, and he became a priest. He's a candidate for sainthood. Tolton, pretty sure that's it. Anyway, and let's see, what was the last thing I was going to do? Oh yeah, so the last thing, and this is what I mean by the language being, just not PC anymore, because I'm going to show you this, and then you can see. And they're meaning well. The poem means well. It's talking about the pain that somebody, but there's a poem called The Half-Breed. But it's a moving poem about how alienated and the pain of being rejected by society and looked down upon. But this article is the Puerto Rican and the Church of New York. And it goes into all the issues going on in 1954 and how they're trying to deal with the tensions. And, you know, they mean well and all that stuff, but it, you know, there was, and even today, you know, we're suffering so much still from this same thing. And racism is just, you know, it's just part of being, you know, in a fallen world, and we're always going to be fighting it in some form or another, unfortunately, this side of heaven. So, I mean, and that's what we have to do. We have to always fight it. Anyway, so I do want to learn more about the history of Puerto Rico. I don't know anything. And then the last part of the magazine, I'm going on too long, is the book reviews, which I love. Oh, and the thing about the book reviews is it really took me down a rabbit hole, because you know, last Sunday I listed all the different people I mentioned, and one of them was Hans Urs von Balthasar. And I went to the Word on Fire Institute. So the Word on Fire Institute was founded by now Bishop Robert Barron. And he's sort of, in American Catholicism right now, it's really torn because it's been so, I don't want to get political, but it's been so influenced by Trump and just the conservatives or the right-wing elements, and also Francis, because he's perceived as being very left or liberal. And so things have just gotten really extreme. And of course, social media makes it worse. And you have these, I mean, it's just, the tension is just awful. People behaving very badly. You know, so anyway, so Bishop Robert Barron started this organization called Word on Fire many years ago. And he's on the internet. And he gives talks, and you can see him, sometimes he's interviewed like on CBS or NBC or something. Sometimes he's their sort of religious, you know, reporter, not reporter, but, you know, they'll interview him over some issue, like the fire at Notre Dame in Paris. He was interviewed there. Anyway, he's put out these documentaries, he's written lots of books, everything. And so I joined this Word on Fire Institute, and I haven't been very active, but I went there to their forum, and I asked about this magazine, and nobody really knew about it. It's not a very active forum, but somebody connected me to an article at some website called, I think, CatholicHistory.net or something like that. I'll link it below if anybody is interested. But anyway, it gives the whole history of this and talks about who influenced it. And I'm only getting this little snapshot from 1954. There are a lot of other really influential people who wrote for this magazine. And one of them, of course, was Hans Urs von Balthasar. And I didn't know much about him. I'd heard his name bandied about, but I really didn't know anything about him. But at the Word on Fire Institute, they also have courses you can take. If you join the organization, you have access to these courses. And so I've gone down this rabbit hole where I've been learning about Hans Urs von Balthasar from Bishop Barron. He teaches the course. And really interesting, really, really interesting. And now, I mean, Hans Urs von Balthasar was a 20th century theologian. He was Swiss. He was a Jesuit. He was not an academic. He gave retreats. That's what he did. He was a priest. He was just a beautiful person. And Bishop Barron really likes him. And he was influenced by Goethe, which I never thought in terms of Goethe influencing a theologian, but yeah, Kierkegaard. And then he really liked a contemporary of his who was Protestant, Karl Barth, also I think a Swiss theologian, but Protestant. And they apparently were great friends, and Balthasar really admired him. So now I really want to, my magazine just fell apart. I really want to read Goethe and go back and read a little more Kierkegaard. I read some of them a long, long time ago when I was a philosophy minor, but I don't remember a thing. Also Karl Barth. But I'm really I'm really enjoying this course by Bishop Barron on Balthasar. And, you know, that happened because of this magazine. So good things are happening because of this. Anyway, book reviews. I'm going to do this really quickly because I'm already at 90. Oh no. Okay, on race and racism, the Catholic Church and the Race Question by Reverend Yves Congar. I mentioned him last Sunday. Another book review that they do is The Manner is Ordinary by John Lafarge. And he, for a long time, was editor of I think it's the most widely read Catholic magazine in America, at least in America. All right, I think I'll end there because it's now 20 minutes, so I better be quiet. So I will talk to you later. Sorry about, I'll put links to various articles and people in the show notes below. But have a beautiful day, and I will talk to you probably tomorrow. I'm going to post my May is for Magazine McClure's. So bye, talk to you later. Bye.